All right, welcome to PTV. My name is Anthony Momodu. Thanks for joining me on today's edition of Outside the Studios interview. On today's interview, I've got a very interesting guest. All right, pardon me as I borrow the words of my guest. Last year, after 3 years of tough negotiations, member countries of the United Nations adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. The 17 goals are geared towards fighting poverty, bringing equality, and also ensuring that the planet is transformed come 2030. On today's edition, I have no other person but the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, Thomas Gass, who is in charge of policy, coordination, and interagency affairs. He is, before joining the United Nations, was the ambassador of Switzerland to Nepal from 2009, where he managed a $30 million program fund, which he excelled in. On today's edition, we want to say a big thank you to the Assistant Secretary General for joining us all the way from the United Nations headquarters in New York. You're welcome, sir. All right, let's go straight to the matter of the day. We are talking the Sustainable Development Goals ahead of the 2016 Legislators Summit, which you will be one of the key speakers in Nigeria. Let's begin the questions by asking, the adoption of the SDG hailed as one of the most participatory processes in United Nations history. How does this assure the success of the 2030 SDG goals? Have you been to Nigeria before, or is this your first visit?
Well, I have been. Actually, I was in the early 90s. I was based in Bamenda, Cameroon.
Okay.
And I did work at that time together with IITA and on sweet potato and Irish potato seed programs, building seed programs in the Jos Plateau and in the province of Cameroon. So I've been there before, but it's so long that I think you should start counting again from zero.
All right, I'll do that. All right, you're coming to Nigeria for the legislative summit on the SDG goals. What are you hoping to achieve? What are you looking at as the most important thing for you?
I'm very excited by this invitation because I really believe that the legislature and parliaments have to seize this 2030 agenda. You see, one of the big changes in regard to maybe previous big agreements is that this agreement is really a promise of the leaders and of the state to the people.
Okay.
And who better than parliamentarians and to be there as an intermediary between the state and the people and to be accountable to the people. And so I believe that having legislature, having parliaments on board for the 2030 agenda is absolutely critical. We have to turn these goals into laws, into budget lines, into rules, etc.
All right.
The executive, the state, the leaders have to be held accountable to the promise that they made to the people.
All right, judging by Nigerians' concerns as regards the misgivings between the executive and the legislators, are you sure the legislators would be able to effectively play their monitoring, planning, and accountability roles in helping Nigeria achieve the Sustainable Development Goals come 2030?
You know, legislature, the parliament, and the executive, there are frequently in countries there are at let's say in an intense discussion with each other. That is quite normal because they have to balance each other's power. They are part of a checks and balance system. Now, what is important about the SDGs is that there is another strong participant that has to come into this balance, and that is the people themselves. And so I believe that if it just boils down to to a difference in opinion between the parliament and the executive, we may not get very far. But if the people are brought into the picture, and both the state and the executive and the parliamentarians start being accountable to the people, then I think that actually we might get somewhere. And that challenge is the same in other countries, by the way.
All right. What would be the implications of countries and governments that do not share the aspirations and priorities of the Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, thank you for your kind words, but really, the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals are no longer about the United Nations.
Okay.
This is a promise that the leaders made to the people. And so what I'm coming to Abuja to help do is discuss with the parliamentarians what this means, some concrete examples, and how they can engage the people in the states, in the municipalities, at the local level to be part of this. How can these 17 goals be broken down to be relevant at the local level? I think that is really important, and it's the beginning of a road that has to be traveled together, and we're looking forward. I'm very excited that Nigeria is stepping ahead and is going to be one of these first countries that really establishes, it's not the first, but one of the first countries that really establishes very strong parliamentarian discussions on this.
All right. Okay. Just to add to that, how do you think the parliament would be able to actually effectively capitalize and leverage on the SDGs, talking about the Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, there's two good news. First good news is all 193 member states, United Nations, joined this agreement, and so really everyone should be on board. You know, somebody said, and actually the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said, that the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs are like a declaration of interdependence.
All right.
Either we all win or we all lose. You know, we all have to be part of that. I mean, all the countries of the world, and that's why it's very important that everyone really participates. The other good news is, of course, that the Sustainable Development Goals are not a one-size-fits-all arrangement. They don't actually tell every country how you have to achieve it. They are a shared vision of where we want to get to. But every country, every state, every constituency has to discuss what that means specifically in terms of goals, targets, indicators at the local level that can be achieved through legislation, through partnerships at the local level.
All right, with your wealth of experience and knowing that you've traveled almost around the world, you've been to Nepal and several other countries, Cameroon and other countries doing the SDG goals. We would like to know, have you been to any other country to discuss the SDG, and also have you talked to other parliaments as regards achieving these goals? We would like to know, give us an insight on how it went.
I travel a lot to different countries to discuss the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm not the only one there. Of course, if I can say, the SDG advocate-in-chief is our Secretary General, who is going around the world every day. He's talking in a different country about the importance of these goals. Right now in Marrakesh, you know, our leaders are talking about climate change and their relationship with sustainable development. And then there are individuals who are strong advocates. I know, for example, Nobel Prize winner Leima Gbowi, who maybe some of your country people may know.
Yes.
She's one of the very strong advocates. Also, Ala Murabit or Grasa Machel, for example, they are going around the world every day speaking about the importance of these sustainable development goals, and so do I. I was had a very good experience in Finland, for example, and I actually have a delegation of the Finnish Parliament this week coming to see me again, where the different parties in the Finnish Parliament debated with each other about the Sustainable Development Goals and started discussing, well, if we really want to achieve these, maybe we need to speak about policy coherence.
Okay.
It's not just about, and it's not just about each ministry doing their own job, but the ministries discussing together how they should do it and discussing with the parliament on what laws are needed, what budget lines are needed, and then also for the parliament to establish tracking system and monitoring system at a national level to achieve the goals.
All right, you technically answered some of my the question I was about to ask you. What other parliament in other countries do that you think the Nigerian parliament should draw from in order to ensure that Nigeria achieves these laudable goals? All right, just as we wrap up, I would just want to ask you specifically, what would be your ultimate achievements coming to Nigeria and when leaving Nigeria? What would be the main thing you'll be looking at to say, yes, the job is half done?
Well, as I explained, I'm hoping to just be have a catalytic role. I think that the fact that I was invited, the fact that your president came here to the General Assembly and actually hosted a huge meeting with other leaders of African countries about sustainable development shows that there is already a strong will in Nigeria to move forward. And so if we can provide any support as the United Nations, support to this dialogue between the leaders and the people, then in order to make these goals and targets very concrete at the local level, I think that would be very useful. It's also necessary to start thinking about one of the very important principles of the 2030 Agenda, which is the principle of leaving no one behind, which is something that was quite new, actually. In the previous goals, in the Millennium Development Goals, the idea was to reduce poverty by half.
Okay.
And so somewhere the other half was already part of the, was part of the program, that they would be left out. And so here there is in the SDGs, in the 2030 Agenda, there is really a commitment to come at the problem from both sides. We need economic growth. We need good conditions for investment. We need stability and good governance in the country and legislation. And to actually underpin that, we need good budgets. We need to analyze our financial flows to see whether they actually help deliver on sustainable development. But at the same time, we need to know who in our country, who in our states, who in our communities are the most vulnerable and why they are vulnerable. And building the resilience of these people into our development programs at every level has to be part of the way we do business in the future.
I want to say a big thank you to the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs from the Economic and Social Affairs Department. Thank you for your time well spent and throwing more light on the adoption of these Sustainable Development Goals and also how he intends to, and how he intends to pass the knowledge to the Nigerian legislators on the key roles they will be playing in ensuring that Nigeria achieves the SDGs come 2030. My name is Anthony Momodu, saying thank you for being part of this very interesting interview. I want to say a big thank you to Christina Ude, the consultant to the House of Rep on Sustainable Development Goals, for making this interview possible. I want to say well done for the good work you're doing to ensure that Nigeria achieves the Sustainable Development Goals come 2030.